גבירותיי ורבותיי,
Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon, one and all. We are reaching yet another peak at the Herzliya conference. We are about to begin with the evening session, followed by the closing session. We will now have a session that will focus on the key issues on Israel's agenda. We will hear from the State Comptroller and the Ombudsman, Honorable Judge retired Joseph Haim Shapira, who's been in this position since 2012. Since 2003, he was the judge in the District Court of Jerusalem, and before he was appointed judge, Judge Shapira was an attorney for over 3 decades. Judge retired Shapira has been in various positions in the military and ended as the Judea and Samaria military court judge and also in the appeals court. The State Comptroller and Ombudsman, Joseph Haim Shapira, was also in various public positions in the Israeli Bar Association and outside it, including the Jerusalem Theatre Group and the Shulaim Theatre. There are many other positions, but I thought these two are so remarkable because they're not part of the law world, and that's why I decided to mention them. Judge Joseph Shapira is a man of Jerusalem, and therefore he wrote a book called Aluf Shaltiel about the head of the Etzioni division in the Independence War 70 years ago. So it is a great privilege and honor to ask to the stage Honorable Judge retired Joseph Haim Shapira, the State Comptroller and Ombudsman.
Dr. Chaim Weizmann.
Dr. Chaim Weizmann, thank you so much for all of your compliments. I would rather have introduced myself, as is common in adverts for beauty salons, in 2 words, the State Comptroller. And then they continue in the advert, and in 5 words, the State Comptroller and Ombudsman. In Hebrew, it's 5 words. And I am stressing it because afterwards I will explain what I do as the Ombudsman. Apropos how many words, I assume that Eli Rubinstein, who spoke here before me, told you that before he gives a presentation, he always wants to say a few words. So we will delve right into this presentation. But beforehand, I would like to thank the organizers of this conference and those wonderful hosts, because everyone knows that the Herzliya conference is a central public stage in Israel with great resonance. I will begin with current affairs. In light of the developments security-wise, the preparedness of the home front will probably be at the center of any future conflict. My office places great emphasis on criticism and critique of this area, and the last report dealt with the preparedness for the protection of the home front against missiles and rockets. And from this critique, it emerges that in recent years, a lot has been done in terms of preparing the home front and protecting it. However, there are still gaps in place, some of them very significant in preparing in terms of physical protection, particularly in the north, in terms of warning systems and also vacating and evacuating populations in case of need. And these gaps may pose a risk to the lives of inhabitants during wartime. And From here, I would like to call upon all those responsible in the Israeli government to do everything in their power to bridge those gaps and to strengthening the preparedness of the home front at this time, as we detailed in writing in the report. I would now like to say a few words about the areas in which my office engages. As the State Comptroller, we have 5 divisions: security, government, society and welfare, local government, and economics. And there is also an administrative unit with several subunits. As the Ombudsman, I am in this capacity as well. We look into primary elections and elections under the law, and we also put together all of the conflict of interest committee affairs, and I also have a residuary capacity under which I can look into any other matter that the State Comptroller should find the need for, which is a section of the law of the State Comptroller. In recent years, we discovered headlines in the media whereby senior position holders in the public sector are being charged with corruption. And a while ago, I was part of a book launch of author Eliad Shraga about disclosing corruption, and the question was: is Israel corrupted, or is it corrupting its leaders? Is it corrupt or corrupting its leaders? Yitzhak Zamir, former Supreme Court judge, said in a paper about the danger of state corruption that when the state is corrupt, its army is also corrupt. Corruption does not end with a senior echelon, but also spreads. And I think, he says, that we are at a point where there is implicit expansion of the corruption cancer. If it continues to develop, it will be a danger to our existence as a nation. And since I know the institutions, the national institutions, and all their levels, I don't think that Israel is corrupt or corrupting its leaders. However, I would like to talk about some points that almost every citizen notices. The first, there are too many gray areas, in quote unquote, where there is ambiguity and disclarity. And this connection between money and power is still around. And this term, and it comes, the money power axis, it comes from nexus, comes from Arabic, minhon, from here. And sometimes people have too much power without supervision, that they won't use that power or abuse that power rather. And many decisions are made in a process that is not transparent to the public, and above all, there is still an atmosphere that allows for or creates corruption, even if these are done by a relatively small number of elected officials. This conference focuses on some of the challenges faced by Israel, and among them, the economic and security aspects that emanate from the rapid changes and dynamic changes around us and in global economy. Certainly, these challenges are very important, some of them even existential, and that is why it is so important to enhance the battle against corruption that may actually render us that tree that came overnight and then disappeared overnight in the book of Jonah. So we must educate for integrity, commitment, and accountability, and also by creating effective deterrence by the law enforcement agencies. There is great high chances that a citizen who will develop such values from childhood will, as an adult, refrain from taking part in any corruption. His peers who did not internalize these values will have to be judged by law. And while education and deterrence are important, we also have a duty to do everything in our power in order to expose corruption and to give those who are not corrupt a place of respect. We need to learn and find out what is a point of concern for those who want to shed light on corruption and discover why those who have the information do not give it to the authorities and do not seek protection. That, alongside the need with which the families of those who do expose corruption deal with the fact that it takes so long to look into these, and the long proceedings, and the social seclusion of those who shed light upon corruption. While a judge, I was determined to address offenses of corruption in order to create effective deterrence. This trend continues in my current position, and after almost 6 years as the State Comptroller and Ombudsman, I believe that we have made a lot of progress in exposing corruption in light of the steps we have taken, and I will specify which. During those years, I have had more protection warrants than ever. If in 2012 no such warrants were issued, then in 2009 and 10 I gave 10 such. In 2016 I gave 25 such warrants, and in 2017 I issued 31 orders for protection. Some fixed ones, 14 got fixed ones, and the others resolutions where the sides reached a compromise in order to continue working where they worked or receive compensation. During those years, as part of my temporary order for protection issuing, if the request was in place, much like the temporary warrants granted by the courts when only one attends the court discussion, and that is in order to balance the power of the employer and the power of the employee. However, we look into each of these lawsuits or complaints carefully in order to make sure that we are not involved in workplace disputes. As part of a decision given upon a request of order of protection for someone who wanted to shed light on corruption, I said that it is the employer's duty to make sure that their employee has a work environment that is protected and to stop any harassment against employees. And by doing so, we expanded corruption disclosures to their family in what we call a holistic attitude. And we were helped by the Witness Protection Authority and the police headquarters and the psychologist Dr. Michal Morag. We also hired a social worker, a full-time. Protecting those who expose corruption means they have to stay in their workplace, and that can only happen if they will no longer be mistreated. And therefore, I have intensified the use of arbitration and mediation when it comes to the complaints of those who expose corruption, just like in personal status and relation and employee relations, and many opposing parties left my office hugging and embracing. But when I saw that there was no other choice but to stop the employee relations, at times because of both parties' desire or for in cases where it was impossible to do otherwise, then I gave them special compensation. Often the parties agree that I pass judgment according to what I think, and I gave an employee who was not a gatekeeper awarded her 750,000 shekels plus legal fees. But of course, we need to look into each and every case um, separately and individually. And as a side note, I will say that when you contact any organization that can issue an order for protection, it's either the court of the labor court or to myself, but many choose to turn to us because the process is much shorter and it does not require too many resources such as opinions, expert opinions, and legal counsel, and so forth. Over the last few years, the Ombudsman has had more power and more authority. Until 2014, the Ombudsman authority or power to issue order for protection was only for those employees who disclosed clear corruption. But Miki Rosenthal led the campaign to add the power to issue orders for protection, even if it's just a violation of proper management or proper administration. Clearly, it is the public interest that that corruption be disclosed. Moreover, seeing as legal counsel is so expensive, I initiated, since those complaining usually hire the services of top legal counsel, I therefore initiated a law amendment whereby the disclosure of corruption will receive legal counsel at no cost and without any inspection, and with the help of Tzipi Livni, the then Minister of Justice, the law was so amended. And although the public is making progress in its understanding, still there is a long road to come for issuing more orders of protection. And until we can say that we have changed the public opinion, the public attitude, and the way that we conduct ourselves vis-a-vis those who disclose corruption, there's still a long road ahead. Another thing has to do with relevant, effective criticism, the kind that can win public trust and the trust of those who are audited. As for real-time criticism, it is carried or audit, it is carried out not in the way that for almost 3 decades people think. For instance, the law about the bank shares, the La Vie aircraft project in 1987, the gas masks in 91, the preparations for the Y2K in 99, and the Wisconsin plan as for the way the Home Front operated in the Second Lebanon War and also in the disengagement.
As part of this issue, I want to refer to the report on Operation Protective Edge, which was a very unique report. The criticism of this part of the report that discussed the issue of the tunnels, we began 6 months before the operation began. But I want to expand a bit about this report and point out that although the report was critical, we also have to consider broad national issues to make the report effective. and that is with regard to the international law that prevented investigation of the prosecution in Hague that says that a certified and independent party that is unaffiliated with the country, you cannot investigate a different international organization. The same applies to the threat of drones. A special report was published in November 2017 that was published less than a month after Ben Gurion Airport was shut down because of the presence of a drone. Anyone who saw the performance of 350 drones in the Independence Day celebration can understand the risks and dangers that this can present. I also gave my opinion at real time about long-term nursing care agreements and the report on the government company authorities and auditors for government companies, a special report that was published last month, and another report on privatization of the military manufacturing company. And recently, Minister of Finance Moshe Kachlon said that due to the delays in the privatization process, the state saved close to 1 billion shekels. I believe that the existence of criticism, of critique, shortly after the events is crucial because publishing reports that are irrelevant is like crying over spilled milk. Note that over the last few years, there have been quite a few reports that have changed reality, both in economic fields and for fields related to citizen rights and enhancing the rule of law and problematic behavior by public figures that resulted in them leaving their positions. A pilot project of the biometric project, the privatization at Bezek. There was also a report that brought an end to the service of people in different government organizations and in institutions of higher education. Sometimes just sending the first draft of a report makes changes in the field, and the result makes investing efforts in a full report redundant, like removing the person head of the chief rabbinate office because of facts that were noted in one of our reports. The same applies to business laws and enforcement of other laws. We are working on our reports, but those that received the draft corrected the problems and began to enforce the law as required, making the final and full report redundant. But still, effective critique and criticism that receives public credibility will be sustainable only if it exists alongside an ongoing process of supervision to ensure that the problems are corrected. The process of making corrections to the state controller's law, the amendment bill says as follows: public reports on the results of the work done by the supervised organization following the report. This report will serve as the basis for future criticism done by the state controller in the future. In order to help the audited organizations to implement their obligation to report all of the corrections that they make, we prepared a structured, simple, and easy-to-use form. This information will be available to the public in the near future on the state controller's website. And then including the recommendations and all of the corrections will be transparent to everyone. And the words of Louis Brandes will actually happen. The light of the sun is the ideal, and the light of the lamp is the best police officer. In a time of accessible media and social networks, mention of the name of the head of an organization in which problems were found in accelerates correction of problems during the criticism process, the controlling process, because no one wants their name to appear on Google in negative contexts. An example, I can bring an example from yesterday's edition of Globes that covered two issues. One, the title says, for the first time ever, IDF gave the Ministry of Finance about the cost of salaries and pension costs. And the article goes on to say that following a harsh report by the State Comptroller, the Chief of General Staff instructed that the bonus for the Chief of General Staff be limited to 10%. Following the report on Operation Protective Edge, which mentioned the issue of Hannibal, the Hannibal procedure that was criticized, and in the draft, when the Chief of General Staff saw that in the draft, he immediately canceled the Hannibal procedures that were in place until then, and we then prepared an updated report and published that. Another example, in the same newspaper, yesterday's Globe's paper, the headline is surprise inspection in Ashdod. 3 construction sites of 4 were closed because of security deficiencies. And the next line, it says that just one day after the State Comptroller report was published on construction site deficiencies, the Ministry of Construction inspected the sites. There were reports on people working without helmets, etc., etc. Cut, that's it, my time's up. Can you give me 2-3 minutes? Okay, then I'll just give me a minute and I'll just tell one more story. It's a well-known trick to say cut. I learned it firsthand when I was a young lawyer and I appeared before a judge in the Jerusalem District Court, and I began my oral summaries, and I'm talking and talking until he said in his South African accent, Attorney Shapira, your summary will sparkle like a diamond if it's cut.